A Ukrainian MiG-29 just pulled off what military analysts are calling impossible, a solo strike deep behind enemy lines that ended with an entire Russian command center erased from existence. But here's what nobody's talking about. The pilot had one engine blown out, hydraulics failing, and every air defense system in the region hunting him down. What happened in those final 60 seconds changed everything. If you want to see how modern aerial combat actually works when everything goes wrong, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness rewrites the rules of air warfare. The impossible weapon swap. The moment that Ukrainian pilot flipped the master arms switch, he was betting his life on a weapon system that violates every rule of military engineering. American JDAMs were never designed to talk to Soviet aircraft. The electrical systems literally speak different languages, running on incompatible voltages that should fry the circuits on contact. Ukrainian mechanics solved this by stripping the wiring harnesses from both systems and soldering together custom adapters in basement workshops, creating Frankenstein connectors that somehow convince a 1970s Russian jet that it's carrying Soviet munitions while the bomb's computer thinks it's mounted on an F-16. These modifications take 140 brutal hours of rewiring per aircraft, with technicians working by flashlight during blackouts, racing against the clock because every day this jet sits in a hangar is another day Russia advances. The standard JDAM glides 45 miles when dropped from cruising altitude in peaceful skies. But Ukrainian pilots are releasing them at 15,000 feet while missiles scream toward them, which means the weapon's computer has to recalculate its entire glide path in microseconds while accounting for the aircraft's defensive maneuvers during separation. Every single release is a physics experiment with no margin for error, because the difference between a direct hit and complete failure is literally 4 seconds of flight time. But getting the weapon to work was nothing compared to reaching the target without being vaporized first. Cold War radar shouldn't work, but it does. That ancient P-18 radar tracking the MiG through terrain should be in a museum, not actively hunting aircraft in 2024. Soviet engineers built this system when Nixon was president, using vacuum tube technology and analog displays that belong in a retro arcade game. Yet it's detecting stealth approaches that defeat billion-dollar modern systems. The secret is brutally simple physics. This radar operates on frequencies so low that its wavelengths are longer than most trees are tall. Modern radars shoot tight, laser-like beams that bounce off the first solid object. But the P-18's massive wavelengths bend around hills, penetrate forests, and basically ignore terrain that should provide perfect cover. The detection range is wildly inconsistent. Sometimes 250 kilometers against high targets, other times barely 30 kilometers against ground-hugging aircraft. But that unpredictability makes it more dangerous because pilots can't reliably estimate when they're safe. Every time that MiG climbed even slightly to clear a power line or cell tower, the P-18 operator saw a brief flash on his scope, and after years of experience, he knew exactly what intermittent contacts spaced 8 seconds apart meant. A jet using terrain masking and heading straight into his sector. He started making phone calls to every air defense battery along the projected flight path, and suddenly what should have been a quick strike mission became a running gauntlet through an entire integrated air defense network that now knew exactly where to look. The math that decides who lives. The pilot glanced at his fuel gauge and did the mental arithmetic that every fighter jock dreads. He was burning through his survival margin with every defensive maneuver. Those twin RD-33 engines sip fuel relatively gently at cruise power, 770 pounds per hour, manageable for a combat mission. But the instant he slams throttles into afterburner to break a missile lock, fuel consumption explodes to 3,400 pounds per hour per engine. That's not a typo. A single 10-second evasive maneuver at full afterburner devours 190 pounds of fuel, and he started this mission with only 7,000 pounds total capacity. He'd already burned 1,200 pounds dodging the first man-pad salvo, and quick math revealed the nightmare scenario. 35 more defensive breaks and he'd be gliding a very expensive paperweight back toward friendly lines, assuming he even made it that far before flaming out over Russian-occupied territory. Every time a missile launch warning screamed in his headset, he had to make an instant decision: trust his maneuvering to defeat this threat kinetically and save fuel, or burn precious gas on evasive action and guarantee survival now while potentially dooming himself later. The fuel gauge wasn't just showing a number anymore. It was a countdown timer showing exactly how many more mistakes he could afford to make before physics killed him, just as dead as any missile. 60 pieces of aluminum between life and death. The chaff and flare dispensers mounted under that MiG's belly held exactly 60 cartridges, and after the first engagement, the pilot had 54 left. Sounds like plenty until you understand that modern Russian man-pads aren't the dumb heat seekers from 1980s action movies. The Igla S variant uses dual-spectrum infrared seekers that compare near-IR and mid-IR signatures simultaneously, essentially giving the missile the ability to tell the difference between a flare burning at 2,000 degrees and actual engine exhaust. Old Soviet doctrine said 1 flare per missile threat. New reality meant deploying 3 or 4 flares per launch and praying the missile's seeker got confused by the thermal cloud. The pilot had already blown through 6 cartridges, stopping 4 missiles, which meant his countermeasure efficiency rate was worse than planned, and there were potentially dozens more man-pads teams scattered between his current position and the target zone. He started making gambling decisions that would horrify safety officers back at base, taking evasive maneuvers against some launches without deploying flares, essentially betting his life that hard turns alone would force a miss. Each time he heard the launch warning tone and didn't punch the countermeasure button, he was playing Russian roulette with a heat-seeking bullet. When satellites disappear from the sky, the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system that just lit up operates from a truck 300 kilometers away and can jam GPS satellites across half of Ukraine simultaneously. The pilot watched his multi-function display in real time as 8 GPS satellites showing solid green lock started flickering amber, then 4 of them vanished completely as Russian jamming flooded the L1 and L2 frequencies with electronic noise. That JDAM hanging under his wing needed those satellites. Its advertised accuracy of 5 meters assumes 8 satellites providing constant updates. Drop to 4 satellites and accuracy degrades to 30 meters, which sounds acceptable until you're trying to hit a specific building that's only 40 meters wide. This is where Ukrainian modifications to the JDAM prove their worth. The enhanced inertial navigation system with ring laser gyroscopes could maintain 10-meter accuracy for 2 full minutes without any GPS signals whatsoever. These gyroscopes work by splitting laser beams and measuring how rotation affects the light's path. They're sensitive enough to detect Earth's rotation and can track position changes accurate to fractions of a degree. The system essentially creates a perfect memory of every acceleration, turn, and movement from the moment the bomb leaves the aircraft, calculating its position through pure physics and mathematics. But even with the world's most sophisticated guidance system, that bomb still needed the one thing no technology could provide: a pilot willing to fly straight and level for 4 seconds while multiple missile systems tried to kill him. That MiG is still airborne with half its systems destroyed, Russian gunners tracking every move, and just enough fuel to, maybe, cross the border before the engines quit. Whether the pilot survived, what the satellite images revealed about that command center, and the intelligence gathered from the rubble changes everything you think you know about this conflict. Hit subscribe right now, because what comes next is classified material that just got declassified, and you're not going to believe what they found in the wreckage. The real story starts after the explosion.